Good day, everyone. You're welcome to the Beauty Writing Podcast. My name is Oyemi Shinwakana. Today we'll be looking at poetry, and not just looking at poetry, saying techniques or tactics. No, we'll be understanding why we should celebrate poetry, and this is in response to April being the National Poetry Month. I'll look at how I intend to celebrate National Poetry Month, and suggest a couple of ways you can celebrate National Poetry Month. Now, National Poetry Month, it's a great month, and there are a couple of things you could do. For me, I find that I put these things in three categories. One is reading, second is writing, and then the third is performance. Now, the first one, which is reading poetry, you could do a lot of things to spice things up. First, you could decide to read poetry from a country you've never read poetry from before. There are a lot of great poems from different countries. Let's say you're in the US and you're like, oh, I've not read poetry from Nigeria, I've not read poetry from Uganda, I've not read poetry from Kenya, African countries. I've also read poetry from China, I've not read poetry from England, Scotland. The poetry from different countries. Some of them have are translated, and some of them are written by the poets in English. But they're still poetry. Yeah, and you get to see different styles. If you see something completely different, and it will shake what you might know poetry to be. Yeah. If, for example, you grew up knowing poetry to be something to be rhymes, and you get to see poems in free verse in a completely different form. You're like, wow, this is beauty. Without form, it took its own form, it created its own form, it shaped its own form. That is reading. What you could also do is decide to say, okay, I'm going to read a couple of poetry books, or I'm going to read the founding books. And in reading, you just get to see different forms of poetry. You could decide to say, okay, I want to alternate the kind of poetry I read based on the themes, uh, which is also a way of approaching it. But for me, how I would be approaching this would be, see how I can read a poem a day. Yeah, just read a poem a day, and I'll be getting these poems from different reputable magazines like Trip Penny Review, Granta, and the New Yorker, and just see how I can read these poems and look at them, connect with the poem, get the emotional uh, force of the poem, and also see how I can analyze the poem as a writer and get to write better poems too, which is great. And the second category is writing. Yeah, now this is a period where you can also text and explore different forms of writing. You could say, okay, wow, I've been writing free verse poems all my life. How about I go and I write some limericks and some haiku? I write rhyming poems too. I just try your hands on a sonnet and see, well, why Shakespeare decided to write sonnets. What made him fall in love with the form of sonnets. And when you write those forms, it's good in a way, and I'll explain this first. It's good because we want to be free, but sometimes when we are constrained and restrained, it gets us to start thinking. Take, for example, if I say, I wanted to write a poem about the lifetime of a man which goes across maybe 50 years in 5 lines. Now, those lines, yeah, it could be as long as you want, but it's in 5 lines. I want to write that poem in 5 lines. It shouldn't be so. It should evoke emotion. It should give me a picture of what went on in 5 lines. Now I have constrained you, because if I say 50 years, you could decide to say you want to write a book. But now I'm like, just do it in 5 lines, and you're like, wow. Now we can't go beyond 5 lines. How do we make every line count? That constraint can get you to start thinking. So you can decide, okay, let me try a completely different form of poetry. Okay? Or let me try a completely different theme of poetry. Let's say you write about love, love, love. Let's say you could also write about memories, you could write about growth, you could also write about war, you could also write about peace. And you could decide to say, okay, I want to write about nature. Write about poems about nature, animals, and objects too. So when you test out new things, you cannot really know the things that you like except you try them. You get, and sometimes when you try out new things, you end up bringing a residual knowledge of what you already know into those things. So with that residual knowledge and with the new thing that you're doing, you create something that is completely different. So with the previous experience you have and the new thing you're trying, what happens is that you create a poem, for example, that is, let's say you write free verse and you decide to say, okay, I want to, okay, a perfect example would be if you write about love and you like, I want to write about animals. So where you could write about love in the animals, how people connect and stuff like that. And the story, the previous experience will come and will blend and create something that's special and unique. It gets that's right. But for me, how I would be celebrating writing will be just to write a poem a day. Try as much as possible to write a poem a day. My overall goal is to get the poems I'll be writing in April, to get them published in magazines. I'll be sending those poems to magazines, and I want to, there's the moments where you write and you're like, ah, it's good, and then you write a poem and you're like, yeah, I wrote that poem. That's yeah, like you're not being uh deluded, or like cut out from the reality. No, you write a poem to the extent that it's exactly what you imagine in your mind. Yeah, because for most beginners, what we imagine is quite different from what we create. Completely different. What we imagine in our head is a perfect line of poem, a perfect stanza of poem, but what comes out is different. So what happens is that our skill and our manner of telling has not really be, become strong enough to be able to reproduce exactly what we think in our mind. So I'll be writing the poem a day, and hopefully I'll get to edit that poem and send it to magazines and get them published, which will be great and awesome. Then the third part is performance poetry. And for performance poetry, is simply thinking of how you can create poems and put them into multimedia. Yeah, because for me, I've always been thinking about the idea that most poetry that people write are written for the elites. Yeah, by elite I mean people who really understand poetry, the people who they can understand your poetry. And why that is good, and I'm not saying that there's anything bad with that. There is also, what if we wrote poem that anybody, as long as they understand the language, can understand what you have written. Now, of course, there will be hidden meanings and symbolisms and all those things, but when they hear the poem, they can like, oh, this is what happened and this is what happened. Unlike some poems that when you read the poems, you're like, whoa, you don't even get it. You have to like sit down to digest and break it down. So I've been thinking, okay, what if you write poems that you can perform? Some of the common poems there now there's what we call Insta poetry, where people write poems on Instagram, and usually the audience is larger compared to the traditional academic poems, and when with that you can reach a larger audience, you can send your message across to a larger audience, which is great. For most people, they feel that if you write that kind of poem, that it is not original poetry. And I'm like, who decides what's original and what's not original? Who decides it? Well, it's because it's more like when poetry free verse poetry started, like became was trying to become mainstream. A lot of people were like, we're writing poems as blank verse, we're writing poems as rhymes with the different. We had the sonnets, we had the different kinds of poems. Now you trying to read free verse. We don't really think that free verse. We think free verse is just the poet being lazy. That's the reactions like that. But now free verse, people like, if you write poetry, who write rhymes? Like, well, rhymes is just stupid, you know. So sometimes something might become new, and people feel that because it's new, they feel that it's not just good, that it's just the complete opposite, that it's not right. That's not true. So performance poetry, we'll be doing spoken word, and we'll be trying to see how we can make videos for the poetry and publish them on different platforms. We'll be trying to see how we can write specific poems that will be that are meant to be performed. We could make videos showing ourselves and gesticulating, talking to the camera, and making the facial expressions and reciting, not exactly reciting word for word, but performing the poem, allowing every cough, every breath to walk in accordance to the poem, to walk to bring the beauty of the poem. It's the instance where, like, if I read the poem, I wouldn't get the feeling that I would get if I actually listen to the poet perform the poetry. So it's, of course, poetry reading also falls into performance. So creating multimedia for poetry videos and all that also falls into performance too. So that will be a whole lot. And question is, I'm thinking reading poetry, writing poetry, and performance poetry. Question is, I know that's a lot. I'll see how much I can do for April, and I'll update you with everything that is going on. So I don't know how you are celebrating National Poetry Month, or how you celebrate poetry. I'd love you to let me know, and you can um, send me a message on buildwriting.com/speak, and I'll get the message. Once again, it's been lovely talking to you. I am optimistic what can come out of National Poetry Month. I want it to be its period where I really get out of the shadows and out of the darkness and come out as a poet. That I can proudly and boldly say that I'm a poet, and I can boldly and proudly show my work to people and say, this is what I have written. And when I show that work to people, they see the work and they're like, yeah, he's a poet. Unlike you, like in your mind, I want to stop postponing this poetry of a thing, and I want to start creating it. So that's the whole idea behind this. Now, it's been lovely chatting with you. I'll see you in the next episode. Once again, it's Oyemi Chinwakonam from the Build Writing Podcast. Happy National Poetry Month.